Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Capital Extension virtual call-in session. I'm Jessica, the Community Relations Coordinator for the project. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a few things. All participants have been muted to avoid background noise. And following the presentation, we will take comments and questions online and by phone. We will provide instructions when we get to that portion of the meeting. To turn on closed captioning, select that option from the WebEx menu. If you're having any technical issues, you may need to log off and reconnect, or if you're on the phone, hang up and redial. If you continue to experience problems, please contact WebEx support at 866-229-3239. The format for tonight is a short presentation, followed by a question and answer session. Please note that today's meeting is being recorded. Now we will be translating today's broadcast simultaneously via our Spanish language channel. If you need to join the Spanish language channel, please use your phone to dial into the Spanish language line and mute this presentation to hear it in Spanish. Joining me is Maria, who is providing Spanish interpretation for us. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María. Si usted quiere utilizar el audio en español, se puede enlazar para acompañarnos al 1-408-418-9388 o nos puede acompañar por teléfono al 2482-054-6582. La contraseña del seminario web es Capital Extensión 227-48-653 si es por teléfono.
Thanks, Maria. Now I'd like to introduce our CapEx project manager, Joshua Matthews.
Thank you, Jessica. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Joshua Matthews. I am Valley Metro's project manager for this project, the Capital Extension. With me today are a number of our project team members. Wanted to note also our partner, City of Phoenix, represented by Marcus Coleman, is on the line as well. I'd be happy to answer and assist in answering any questions at the end of the presentation. I just wanted to note to assist the simultaneous Spanish translation, I may be speaking a little bit slower than normal, just to assist in that arena. As Jessica mentioned, I have a short presentation for you, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. The map you see here before you is the Capital Extension. That is the green line heading west from downtown Phoenix at 3rd Avenue, along Washington Street, up to Adams, looping around the state capitol via 19th Avenue, and heading back east via Jefferson Street. In downtown Phoenix today, we have the existing light rail line, which is the solid gold line you see, as well as a light rail line that's under construction. That is the dashed gold line and is known as the South Central Downtown Hub Extension. As I said, we'll be connecting into the South Central project at 3rd Avenue. We'll have station platforms that are proposed. They'll be located at 7th Avenue, Washington and Jefferson, at 13th Avenue, Washington and Jefferson, and at 17th Avenue, Washington and Jefferson. Go to the next slide, please. The line that you saw on the map was approved by all 3 of the regional entities that are required to approve a light rail project for our region. That includes Phoenix City Council and Valley Metro's Board of Directors in November of 2021. And then just earlier this year, the Maricopa Association of Governments, or MAG, their regional council approved the updated locally preferred alternative, or the map you saw there, and put it into the regional transportation plan. Next slide. From a funding perspective, the capital extension, we are expecting a split of funding between federal and local dollars. From a federal perspective, the expectation is that about half of this project, or 50%, would be funded through two programs, primarily though the Capital Investment Grant Program. That is a national program that helps, that the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, provides for large infrastructure projects such as these. From a regional perspective, we have about 15% of the funding we're expecting coming from the Public Transportation Fund, which is part of Proposition 400. So this project is part of the existing Regional Transportation Plan and is part of the existing Proposition 400. The remaining funds, 35% of the project, we're expecting to come from the City of Phoenix's local sales tax via their Transportation 2050 program, which was passed in 2015. Now, obviously, these numbers could change, especially if additional federal funding is made available, and that will be updated if that's the case. Next slide. From a schedule perspective, we are looking to deliver this project in late 2027, possibly early 2028. From a development flow process, we are starting in preliminary engineering, which is where we are at today. We move into an environmental assessment, which we're expecting to start later this year. And I'll talk about each one of those a little bit more in depth later. After that, we go into final design, and then we begin construction. After construction is complete, we expect there to be a testing and certification phase, and then we enter into revenue service. It's important to note, as we are here today, this engagement with the community, as well as engagement with our stakeholders and property owners along the corridor, continues throughout the length of the project and really actually expands as we get closer to construction. Next slide. So let's talk about the project development. So I mentioned we are in preliminary engineering. That first green box is where we're at today, and that's the purpose of this public engagement series, is to solicit feedback on these designs. Our first milestone is called a 15% design, and the purpose of that is to really show the main components of the proposed light rail project. So that really comes down to where are the light rail tracks going to be in the street? What are the location of the light rail stations going to be? What does the roadway and the street striping look like after the project's been brought into the street? And then lastly, the sidewalks and access points throughout. After we solicit feedback on this initial level of design, we're going to continue work on what's called our 30% design, or our next milestone date. We will take that input as well as other technical considerations and continue to refine those first 5 bullet points that I just talked about. But in addition, we will start to bring in the ancillary or secondary items that come into the support of a light rail project. And that includes rebuilding drainage, establishing the systems that help power the light rail project, underground utilities, right-of-way, traffic signals, and additional landscaping. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier that we are expecting to start what's called an environmental assessment. Because we are soliciting federal funding for this project falls under what's called the National Environmental Policy Act, or more commonly known as NEPA. NEPA requires that for these type of projects, that the project sponsor goes through a very rigorous process to look at whether or not the project has any impacts on the surrounding area. And you can see here all the different criteria, all the different categories of impacts that we are required to look at, including the historic and cultural resources, noise and vibration, land acquisition, etc. So we'll look at each one of these criteria and see if our project has any significant impacts. If it does, as part of this process, we also look at how we can mitigate those impacts as part of the development of the project. You go to the next slide. So this process usually takes about a year, 12 months. It begins where we are today with a public meeting, really letting the public know that we're starting this process. And then we begin preparing the environmental document based on the analysis that we are looking at for the project corridor. We then solicit comments on that environmental document from the public, from stakeholders in the area, and we work to prepare a final document that gets reviewed by the Federal Transit Administration as well as other key stakeholders. The goal in this entire process is really to establish that the project does not have any significant impacts, or if it does, as I said earlier, that we can mitigate those impacts to an acceptable level. The Federal Transit Administration will issue a decision document, which is called a FONSI, or a finding of no significant impact. And that's really the green light that our project can move forward into construction. Go to the next slide. So speaking of construction, light rail construction can look very different depending on the site, the conditions, the area that we're building in. But typically we follow a fairly standard process. Light rail construction, depending on the length of the project and the complexity, can last anywhere from 3 to 4 years typically. For this project, we're looking much closer to 3 years. The first step that we take typically in light rail construction is called underground utility relocation. Because we are building the light rail guideway in the middle of the street, we cannot have any underground utilities running parallel underneath the guideway. And so we go into the ground and we move, sometimes expand those utilities. Usually this is the most impactful part of light rail construction because the street is being torn up. And that usually is typically the first year or so of construction. After we've moved those or relocated those underground utilities, that's where everything starts to get rebuilt. So the light rail guideway and the tracks themselves get laid in the street gets repaved, we start rebuilding sidewalks if necessary, installing new landscaping and signage, start constructing the station platforms themselves, as well as the overhead electrification system. So the poles, the wires, and the substations that provide electricity to operate the light rail vehicles. After we have reached what's called substantial completion of the project and of construction, we then go through a very rigorous testing and certification process before we begin revenue operations. Go to the next slide. I wanted to focus on public art. Historically, with all of our light rail projects in our region, the region has prioritized incorporating public art into our facilities, and that holds true for the capital extension. On the next slide, I'll talk specifically about those facilities, but before I get there, I wanted to talk about the importance of community input on the public art process. So Valley Metro for each project establishes what's called a SARC, or a Stakeholder Art Review Committee. And this committee reviews the public art submissions and helps work with public artists to identify public art that is reflective of the community, that shows the values and culture of the community that the light rail project is going into. We really encourage stakeholders, members of the public, anyone who is interested in this process to apply to be on the SARC. The application process starts on June 13th and runs until July 21st. Please note, if you did attend our live public meeting, in-person public meeting, these dates have been updated. So there will be selection panels, just want to go back, thank you. There'll be selection panels for each one of the stations, and they will assist in the study of the area itself and reviewing those designs. If you want more information on Valley Metro's public arts program, you can go to valleymetro.org/artsline. Next slide, Jessica. So right now we are expecting public art to be in 8 different locations for this project. We have 3 total stations, but because of the light rail being a loop, a single track loop, we actually have 6 platforms. So we expect public art to be at each one of these station platforms. And then we are expecting 2 traction power substations. And these are small buildings that house the equipment that provides the electricity to the light rail vehicles. We expect public art to be at these 2 facilities as well. Selected artists will create thoughtful, engaging artwork that reflects the character of the surrounding community by coordinating with area residents and stakeholders. Valley Metro will be issuing a call to artists that opens June 30th of this year, with submittals due on August 23rd, again of this year. Again, if you attended our live public meeting, these dates have been updated. Next slide, please. So let's end on some of the next steps and reiterating where we're at today and where we are headed. So I mentioned the public art, and that's going to be going on this summer. There's going to be a big focus on getting those panels together and starting to get our public artist submissions in. The project team is going to continue on with our next milestone, 30% design. And we expect, again, similar to where we are at today, after the delivery of that deliverable, we'll be going back to the public for another series of public meetings, stakeholder meetings, and other engagement activities. And then we expect, again, to begin drafting our environmental assessment this summer with the goal of that being complete in early 2024. And again, throughout the life of this process, we will continue our stakeholder outreach and engagement with the community on the project design. Next slide. That concludes my part of the presentation. I really do want to sincerely thank everyone for their attendance today, for listening in, and we really look forward to hearing your questions, providing you some answers, and hearing your comments. I'll hand it off to Jessica to explain the next part of the meeting process.
Thank you, Josh. We're now going to begin the question and answer portion of tonight's meeting. But before we get there, I'm going to remind anyone that if you are having audio issues, please first try calling into the meeting at 408-418-9388. And then I've also put in the chat a couple different options for getting in. And WebEx support is at 866-229-3239. We have a couple different ways for you to make comments or ask questions during today's meeting. To verbally make a statement or ask a question, we ask that you please virtually raise your hand, and here's how to do that. For those of you using WebEx through your internet browser, mobile phone app, or your WebEx desktop app, follow the instructions on the screen. To ask a question or make a statement, click the raised hand icon. When you are called, the moderator will unmute your mic. When you are finished, the moderator will mute your line, and we ask that you lower your hand by clicking on the raised hand icon again. Again, for those joining us online, these WebEx instructions are shown on your screen. If you're joining us by phone as a call-in participant, press *3. This gives a hand-raised signal, and when it's your turn to speak, we'll call on you and ask you to unmute your line. Press *6 to unmute, and then you may begin speaking. When you finish speaking, press *3 again to remove the hand-raised signal. If you've joined us using one of our WebEx applications, you can also submit your question or comment in writing using the WebEx Q&A feature. These instructions are displayed on the screen. And as a reminder, if you're having technical issues, please contact WebEx at 866-229-3239. We're going to do our best to answer questions in the order they're received. All right. And to get us started, I have one question coming in from the Q&A. Tim is asking, why do you need to do utility relocation? Are there going to be power shutoffs?
That's a great question. So one of the primary reasons that we have to do utility relocations, and this very much applies to what we call wet utilities, water and sewer, is if we were to have, let's say, a 42-inch water line located underneath the light rail guideway, and that water line were to break or have some type of a leak, it would be extraordinarily difficult for contractors to access that facility. So the city of Phoenix, similar to most communities, has what's called a restricted utility area. And that's an area, a buffer area, that means that the utilities have to be located outside of the light rail guideway so that those utilities can be accessed. So the second part of that question was, are there going to be shutoffs? So yes, very much so. If we have to move a water line, if we have to move a power line, if we have to move fiber, anything like that, there will be shutoffs. The important thing to note is that our contractor, Valley Metro, our community relations team will work specifically with each property owner to make sure that those shutoffs are done at an appropriate time for that business or for that property. So as an example, if the business is a typical 8 to 5 office complex, then we would work to do those types of shutoffs in the evening time or on the weekends. Again, if it's a restaurant or some type of business that is operating on the weekends or during different hours, we would work with each one of those stakeholders to make sure that we either remove that impact completely or we minimize it to the smallest possible impact.
Next question I see is from Paul. Paul asks, has funding been secured or is it contingent on Prop 400 extension?
That is a great question. I appreciate that one, Paul. So if you don't mind going, thank you. So the 15% that's shown here is part of the existing Proposition 400, and capital extension is fully funded under that existing proposition and is not reliant on an extension of Proposition 400. The 35% number here is fully committed by the City of Phoenix's transportation sales tax, and the 50% of federal, again, is part of this competitive grant program. Now, this region has been extraordinarily successful in receiving these grants. Almost every one of our projects has been funded in some way through this program.
Thanks, Josh. I'm just going to do a quick reminder. If any of our call-in users want to raise their hand, please press *3, and that will give us a signal that you want to be unmuted to give your comment verbally. I have a same question from Ariel and from Miguel. Thank you. They want to know, will there be a light rail station on or near 19th Avenue?
Great question, appreciate that. So right now, these are the proposed station platforms, and we encourage any feedback or input on these locations themselves. I'll speak to 19th Avenue specifically. So when we looked at locating our station platforms, obviously one of our goals was to serve the state capital area as well as the surrounding community. When we looked at 19th Avenue specifically, there's a number of technical challenges that come with placing something on 19th Avenue. So first off, we have the BNSF Railway on the west side of 19th Avenue. And between BNSF Railway, 19th Avenue itself, as well as the properties on the east, it really creates a pinch point that makes it pretty difficult to place an additional station platform on this location. The other important thing to note is this is not the last planned project for light rail heading west. So on this map, if you see that dark gray line that's going kind of up in the upper left corner of the map, that is the second part, which is the I-10 West extension. And that's planned to go north on 19th Avenue, west on Van Buren Street, north along the I-17, west along Interstate 10, all the way out to 79th Avenue, and then north to Desert Sky Transit Center. The expectation is that the first station platform on the I-10 West project would be just west of 19th Avenue to really provide that great connectivity for the communities in that area. The last thing I'll note about a station on 19th Avenue is when the I-10 West extension does open, that platform would no longer be served by both directions of travel. Because we have a single track here now, the westbound train, instead of looping around as it would for the Capitol extension, when 10 West opens, it would go north. And we typically don't like to have station platforms that aren't served by both directions of travel because it can be confusing for riders and users of the light rail system.
Thank you, Josh. Kendall has asked, what precautions will you have in place to stabilize traffic? There is a train running across 19th Avenue, and I believe that's the BNSF Railway.
Yes, so let me talk just generally about light rail and its interactions with the street, and then I'll touch on kind of light rail and the interactions with BNSF Railway. So as is common in our region, most of light rail is located either in the middle or on the side of pretty major streets. So as such, it becomes part of the existing traffic signal system. It has its own signal phase, and depending on the layout of the intersections, the layout of the street, sometimes that's an exclusive phase for the light rail vehicle, and sometimes traffic can move in the same direction with the train. When we look at this project specifically, we're crossing a number of major streets, and we are going through 19th Avenue. The important thing is on those north-south directions of travel, we aren't changing any lane configuration, and typically the light rail can merge into those traffic signals fairly well. As part of our environmental assessment, we are required to do an analysis on the impact to traffic, and if there is any significant impacts to the level of service of specific intersections or streets, then we would look at mitigation measures to help make sure that traffic flows at an acceptable level. I'll touch on BNSF Railway. So right now, as part of the capital extension, the project would run adjacent to BNSF Railway for about 850 feet. That said, we would not interact with BNSF Railway, i.e. we would not be crossing BNSF Railway, and nothing that our train would be doing would impact how BNSF is operating. Now, there are a couple at-grade railroad crossings that are existing at Adams Street, Washington Street, and Jefferson Street. The existing heavy rail at-grade crossings at Adams and Jefferson would remain. However, we are proposing closing the west leg of 19th Avenue in Washington, which is that orange dot that you see on the map. And that's really to simplify and make possible for the light rail to complete the turn on 19th Avenue back to Jefferson, really without shutting down traffic on 19th Avenue. And so that at-grade crossing with BNSF Railway would be abandoned, and there would be no vehicular or pedestrian crossings there.
Another reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A panel, or if you're having a hard time finding that, you can also send me a chat privately and I'll look at those questions too. We have a question from Sherilyn. She asks, what could be done to get a station closer to 19th Avenue?
A great question. So when we looked at the station locations for this project in general, we look at a number of factors. Generally, we do try to serve major arterials because there are a lot of connections there. There are typically a lot of activity centers or other important areas. So as you see here, we are serving 7th Avenue directly. We are within about 500 feet of 15th Avenue. However, when we started looking at the state capitol area, the area between 15th Avenue and 19th Avenue, there's additional considerations outside of our technical ones. We have to be cognizant that this entire area running from 7th Avenue to 19th Avenue, running from Van Buren down to the railroad tracks, is the state's capital mall, and the state itself has regulatory authority over the development of really any type of project within this area. And so in our engagement with the state, and the other stakeholders in this area, we looked at where the best location for a station would be. And so we looked at between 16th and 17th Avenue, the station you see we're proposing here today, between 17th and 18th Avenue, and then between 18th and 19th Avenue. Between 17th and 18th Avenue, there were challenges related to being able to fit that station platform in just from stakeholder concerns, from a safety and security perspective. And then between 18th and 19th Avenue, we could fit the station platform from a technical consideration on Jefferson. However, in order to make possible the turn going up to the future I-10 West extension, the station platform itself just doesn't fit. And then I mentioned earlier the numerous challenges on 19th Avenue itself in order to put a station platform. So really from a long-term perspective, Valley Metro sees that first station on the I-10 West extension as being the one that will serve 19th Avenue directly in the future. Obviously, there are other things that can be considered when it comes to local bus route connections, and those are things that we can definitely look at and continue to analyze.
Thanks, Josh. Sam would like to ask, what will happen to the rapid bus routes along this area?
That's a great question. So as part of this project, we are intersecting 3 different types of bus routes. We have a local circulator in the area, the Downtown Area Shuttle, or DASH. We have a number of local bus routes, including Route 8, Route 15, Route 19, and Route 3. And then, as was noted, we have a number of express service routes, as well as Phoenix's rapid express service routes. As part of this project right now, we are not proposing any changes to any bus routes. That said, during construction, there may be temporary rerouting of buses, but from a long-term perspective, the operations of today's express and rapid routes would stay the same after this project is completed. I will note that the City of Phoenix, on a separate track and separate from this project, has been doing some community engagement regarding the Dash, and so encourage you to look up information on that if you have any input on the downtown area shuttle.
I have one more question in my queue, so if you do have any final questions, please in the Q&A or in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and you can do that by pressing *3 on your telephone if you're calling in today. This is Jennifer. She asks, how do you join the Art Review Committee?
You want to go back to that slide real quick? Thank you. Actually, Jessica, I'll hand this off to you.
Sure thing.
You could take it.
So the application for the Stakeholder Art Review Committee opens on June 13th through Friday, July 21st. So you would fill out an application and send it in to our public art administrator, and they'll be selecting the committees from those applications. That job is pretty important because those committees will select the artist and give feedback on the station art that will go up on the split stations. I'll also say that they are looking for not only experienced artists, but emerging artists. So for our traction power substations, they will be using 2 emerging artists for those 2 buildings, and for the some of our more established artists for the split stations. So there's plenty of opportunity to really give this project some character that reflects the neighborhood and the stakeholders around. Okay, Paul asks, have you done a traffic study for the Washington Street cul-de-sac? Given that Adams and Jefferson are both one-way, it will impact ingress and egress for the property owners on the north and south sides of Washington at 19th Avenue, and will cause considerable traffic through their parking lots. Let me go back to the map here.
That's a great question. So as part of our overall traffic analysis, we will look at every intersection within our study area, and that will include 19th and Washington. The modeling itself most likely doesn't get down into the fine detail of whether cars would cross through private properties. So that would be something, an opportunity for us, Valley Metro and the City of Phoenix, to sit down with those specific stakeholders and engage with them directly to see what possibilities or what opportunities there are to alleviate or mitigate some of those concerns. Happy to engage with those stakeholders directly and share any and all traffic analysis that we'll perform for this project.
This is a follow-up to the artist question. Kendall asks, how have you all connected with local artists from the area? Let me flip back to art development. So I'll go ahead and take it, Josh, unless you have.
Go for it.
Okay. So they have worked with different art outreach, including, I believe, ArtLink, but they're looking at different ways to connect to the community and reach out to local artists kind of throughout the region. They're really prioritizing, of course, local artists and people kind of in the community. And that's where that the call to artists is opening, like June 30th through August 23rd. So we're reaching out to neighborhood stakeholders, the businesses, and letting them know that both the Stakeholder Art Review Committee and the artist call are opening, so they can reach out to their networks. We'll reach out to our contacts within kind of the overall Phoenix art community to let them know that this opportunity is coming up. Yeah, and if Kendall, if you do have any particular people that you want us to contact and reach out to, we're always looking for additional contacts. So you can email me specifically, and I'll be putting that on our public art administrator radar. I'm putting my contact details on the screen now. You can reach me at jparks@valleymetro.org or at 602-744-5582. I'm also going to throw that in the chat in case anybody needs it, just for ease of copy and pasting. Okay. And I don't see any additional questions. I'm scanning one final time to look for raised hands and not seeing any. And our Q&A and chat look like answered. So I'll go to our final thoughts here and let you know that before you adjourn the meeting, this presentation was recorded and will be posted to the website at valleymetro.org/CapEx. We encourage you to visit the website for more information and to be placed on the mailing list. I'm also going to put another link in the chat. This is for our online comment form. So if you have not had a chance to get your comment in, if you have comments that you think of after this meeting, please fill out this comment form. We are taking entries through the end of the month, and you can put in any thoughts you have about the, about the 15% design. So the station location, how the light rail is running down the streets, about stakeholder art, anything that was covered today, or anything you can think of about light rail, please feel free to leave us a comment and let us know. Okay. Josh, do you have any final thoughts?
Just note again, appreciate your all attendance and engagement in this development process, and we value the input that we hear from our community as well as from our stakeholders. Thank you again.
Thank you, and have a great day, everyone.